Have you ever wondered how people kept track of time before smartphones and digital clocks? Before ticking hands or glowing numbers, before minutes and seconds were counted, time was something far more sacred. Something felt in the shadows on stone, in the rising of stars, in the flow of water through carved clay. Tonight, Sleepster invites you to drift gently into the ancient rhythms of our ancestors, to breathe alongside forgotten instruments and celestial patterns, and to remember that time has always been there, not on a screen, but in the sky, the earth, the silence between heartbeats. Welcome to the clocks of our ancestors, a sleep story of ancient timekeeping. Make yourself comfortable. Close your eyes if you haven't already. And before we begin, tell us, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Your journey through the ancient rhythms of time begins right here. Before the hum of electricity, before the gears of clocks ticked in rhythm with modern life, before the sharp chime of alarm bells or the glowing digits of digital time, there was silence. And in that silence, there was rhythm. A rhythm not made by machines, but by the earth itself. A rhythm older than history, older than speech, older than the very idea of hours and minutes and days. It was the rhythm of sunrise and moonrise, of the ebb and flow of tides, of shadows lengthening in the afternoon, and stars sliding gently across the night sky. Long before humanity shaped the world with cities and roads and calendars, time was not kept. It was observed. It was felt. It was seen in the breath of the seasons, in the return of birds and blossoms, in the arc of the sun across a winter sky. And slowly, softly, those observations became understanding. And that understanding became memory. And memory, in its own quiet way, became measure. The first timekeepers were not engineers or inventors, but listeners. Listeners to the sky, the wind, the patterns that repeated like the soft looping of a lullaby. These early humans didn't divide time into fragments. They walked inside it, they slept with it, they planted their seeds and gathered their harvests in rhythm with it. They didn't own time, they lived within it. Imagine yourself standing on an open plain, long before buildings, before paper, before numbers. The sky is wide, the stars endless. The sun rises and falls, and you begin to notice that the shadow of your body stretches across the ground in a pattern that repeats itself, longer in the morning, shorter at noon, longer again as evening approaches. Maybe you press a stone into the soil where your shadow ends. Maybe you do it again the next day and the next. Maybe others begin to do the same. And soon you begin to understand that these patterns can be trusted, that the sun, in its warmth and light, is also a keeper of time. From that trust, something sacred is born. Not the concept of time as something to control or chase, but time as something you can enter into, like a path made of light and shadow. The first sundials weren't precision instruments, they were gestures. A stick in the earth, a circle of stones, carved groove along which the light moved. They were the earth's reply to a question humanity hadn't fully asked yet, a response in the language of sunlight and patience. As humans began to settle, as communities grew around rivers and fertile land, as people began to plant and reap and coordinate, the need to measure time became less a curiosity and more a necessity. Agriculture, after all, depends on rhythm, on planting before the rains, on harvesting before the cold. Timekeeping became the invisible skeleton of survival. And so those early sundials grew more refined. Instead of guessing, they began to mark. Lines were etched into stone. Circles were carved into the earth, and each mark was a promise. When the shadow reaches this point, the day is ready for its next task. And still, these instruments were not cold, not separate from life. They were part of the world, made from the world. A piece of wood, a rock, a sunbeam. They whispered time gently, without hurrying, without rushing, as if saying, "The world is moving, and so are you." Not too fast, not too slow, just as it always has. But there were limits to the sundial. At night, there were no shadows. On cloudy days, the sun might be hidden. And so, in the deep wells of ingenuity that every ancient culture drew from, a new idea formed: the water clock. Known as the clepsydra, this instrument did not rely on the sky. It relied on the steady flow of water, one drop after another, from one vessel into another, each drop the same as the last. Each container marked with careful lines that allowed time to be seen even when the heavens were silent. In ancient Egypt, the clepsydra was more than a tool. It was a bridge. It allowed priests to perform rituals at precise moments. It allowed courts to time speeches. It allowed people to track the passing of hours when no shadow could help them. And in Mesopotamia, those clocks became more intricate, more beautiful. Shaped from stone and metal, designed not only to work, but to speak to the eye of the gods. Time, after all, was not a human invention. It was a divine language, and to measure it was to honor it. The water clock had a softness to it, a poetry. It moved slowly. It didn't tick. It didn't jolt. It whispered. It counted not with sound, but with stillness. Watching the water descend line by line was a meditation, a reminder that time wasn't something to be chased, but something to be held gently, moment by moment, as it passed through your life like water through open hands. And yet, for all its gentleness, it was powerful. It allowed people to coordinate, to agree, to live together under a shared understanding of when something begins, when something ends. With timekeeping, community became possible in a new way. And still, it remained natural. The water drawn from rivers, the vessels shaped from clay, the markings drawn with pigments mixed from the earth. There was no divide between the human and the natural. The clocks of our ancestors were extensions of the world itself. But the sky was never forgotten. Even with sundials and water clocks, humans continued to look upward, because the stars did not just shine, they moved. They appeared and disappeared. They followed patterns, cycles, dances so vast and so slow that generations had to pass before the full rhythm could be understood. And still, we listened. The moon, especially, held power. Its phases were tracked with care, not just for beauty, but for survival. The tide, the hunt, the planting of certain crops, all answered to the moon's silent clock. And so calendars were born, not digital grids, but carved bones, stones, marks on cave walls, where notches were etched to follow the lunar cycle. In Scotland, the Warrenfield calendar, over 10,000 years old, marks the phases of the moon. In France, carved antlers show early lunar notations. These were not random marks. They were the first attempts to catch the rhythm of the universe in the palm of a hand. As these observations deepened, cultures began building not just clocks, but monuments to time. In England, Stonehenge, with its towering stones, aligns with solstices. In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across the desert, pointing toward celestial events. In Central America, the Maya developed calendars of stunning precision, tracking solar, lunar, and planetary cycles with mathematical brilliance. These weren't just tools, they were temples. They didn't just tell time, they celebrated it. They didn't just measure the heavens. They reminded people that they were part of the heavens, that every heartbeat echoed a larger pulse. That time was not something that passed you by, but something that welcomed you in. The further we look into ancient timekeeping, the more we realize it was never about control. It was about alignment. The ancestors weren't trying to dominate time. They were trying to harmonize with it. And in that harmony, they found meaning. Every tool was sacred. Every calendar a reflection of the stars. Every clock a mirror of the world's breath. And slowly, from these roots, modern timekeeping would grow. But in these earliest instruments, in the sundial's shadow, the clepsydra's flow, the moon's gentle arc across the sky, we find the seed of something deeper than hours and minutes. We find the beginning of a relationship between humanity and the unfolding now, a relationship with the dance of dawn and dusk, a relationship with cycles we can't control but can always trust. So tonight, as you drift through this history, let the quiet rhythm of the past remind you that you too are part of the clock, not ticking, but breathing, not digital, but elemental. And in that breath, in that stillness, the ancient hands of time keep turning, not to chase you, but to carry you gently into rest. The shadow was the beginning, the first movement that could be read, the earliest hand of a natural clock that danced across the ground in silence. And though it gave structure to the day, it vanished at night, and it disappeared behind clouds. And so, as humans grew more curious and more attentive, they searched for a way to keep time even when the sun was absent, and it was not the stars or the fire they turned to next, but something humbler: water, the oldest companion of life, the fluid heartbeat of the world, and in its gentle, ceaseless movement, they found a rhythm more constant than shadow, more steady than flame, and so they built vessels, simple at first. Bowls carved from stone or shaped from clay, with small holes in the bottom, allowing the water to escape in a slow, controlled stream. And as the level fell, lines inside the bowl marked the passage of moments, not measured in seconds or minutes, but in intervals that matched the human world: how long to speak, how long to pray, how long to wait before the next task began. And this was the water clock, known in ancient times as the clepsydra, and it became one of the first timekeeping devices that did not rely on the sky, but on the flow of the earth itself. Imagine now, standing in a temple thousands of years ago, where priests used the steady drip of water to time sacred chants, to perform rituals with precision, not by instinct alone, but by measurement. And the water, cool and quiet, does not call attention to itself, but simply moves, drop after drop, in a cadence that aligns with the breath of the moment. And in ancient Egypt, where the Nile carved the land into seasons, the clepsydra became a vital tool, used not only in religious ceremonies, but in administrative life, to regulate labor, to pace the spoken word, and to understand the passing of night. And the Egyptians crafted their clocks with care, with inner scales that marked the changing hours of the year, adjusting for the longer days of summer and the shorter days of winter. A sophistication that reveals a deep respect for the rhythm of time, not to fight it, but to live in concert with it. And across the sea, in ancient Babylonia and Mesopotamia, the water clock evolved as well, becoming more complex, with multiple chambers and interlocking systems, sometimes shaped like animals, sometimes adorned with sacred symbols, transforming the measurement of time into an art, a language that flowed not only from sky to ground, but now from vessel to vessel. And what makes this transition so quietly beautiful is that it signals a shift in how time was felt, was no longer just something seen in the sky or sensed in the body. It became something that could be carried, something that could move indoors, into palaces and courts, into markets and gatherings, and where the sundial could only speak under the sun, the water clock spoke in the dark, in the hush of midnight, in the hidden places where ritual and reflection unfolded. And so time began to reach deeper into life, not just into the day, but into the night. And with this reach came power kings, and judges began to use clepsydras to measure speeches in courts, to time punishments, to regulate the flow of decision-making. And though these were early steps, they foreshadowed a world in which time would one day govern not just the fields, but the halls of justice, the movements of armies, the rise and fall of empires. But water is not simply a tool, it is a mystery, a presence that slips through fingers, that reflects the sky but refuses to be held. And to measure time through water is to admit something very honest, that we cannot stop time, we can only witness its passage. Just as we cannot hold the river, only stand beside it and feel it pass. And in this way, the water clock became more than an instrument, became a metaphor, a mirror of life itself. Always moving, always changing, always flowing away, and still we try to mark it, not to trap it, but to understand. it to accompany it, to move with it as it moves through us. In ancient China, clepsydras were refined into stunning mechanisms. Some used inflow designs, where water was poured into a container and the rising level marked time, while others used outflow styles. And over time, engineers began to link water flow with mechanical gears and floating indicators, building multi-tiered towers where time could be seen and sometimes even heard as bells rang or figures moved. And in these towers, we see the beginning of mechanical timekeeping, but still rooted in the natural element of water. And in every civilization where water clocks were used, Greece, Persia, India, Korea, we see the same duality. Time is practical and time is sacred. Time is something to measure and time as something to revere. And even as technology advanced, as metals were shaped and mathematics became more precise, the clepsydra endured for centuries. Because it offered something the eye alone could not see, offered continuity, a way to feel time. Even when the stars were hidden, away to trust in rhythm. When the world seemed still and it was portable, adaptable, capable of being used in temples and courts, in palaces and workshops, in remote places, where the only sound was the drop of water echoing in a clay bowl. Some cultures created clepsydras that required constant attention, filling the vessel at regular intervals, adjusting for temperature or humidity, and this care became part of the ritual. Part of the awareness that time was not separate from us, it required presence, stewardship, participation, and in this, timekeeping became a kind of mindfulness, a daily reminder to attend to the passage of existence, not as burden, but as grace. It's easy now, in an age of atomic clocks and satellites, to forget how profound this was, to forget what it meant to measure time not with electricity or quartz, but with water moving through a handmade vessel, to forget that timekeeping once required listening. Watching, waiting, not looking at a screen, but listening to a drip, watching a shadow. Feeling the weight of hours in the hand-thrown clay, in the worn groove of a sundial's edge. And so the story of water clocks is not just about invention, it is about relationship. About how humans related to the passage of time, not as an enemy or a race, but as a flow, a rhythm, a companion, and every drop that fell through those ancient clocks was like a breath, a whisper of the present moment becoming the past. And yet, even as it fell away, it left behind a trace, a measure, a record that said, something happened here, something passed, something mattered. These ancient timekeepers show us that even before hours and minutes were counted, humans were already attuned to the quiet symmetry of change, already aware that life unfolds not in bursts, but in steady, patient rhythm, and the clepsydra, in its simplicity and silence, honored that awareness, offering a gentle framework in which people could align their lives with something larger than themselves. It is a story of ingenuity, yes, but more than that, it is a story of humility, a recognition that time cannot be commanded, only followed, that it is not a possession, but a current, and we, like the water, move through it, drop by drop, day by day, breath by breath. In that careful tracking of points of light across the seasons, the earliest stargazers began to understand something profound. The sky was not random, not chaotic, not unknowable, but orderly, cyclical, dependable. And from that realization bloomed the ancient art of astronomical timekeeping, the practice of watching the stars, the sun, Further east, in India, early astronomers like those behind the Vedanga Jyotisha observed the movement of the sun and moon with remarkable accuracy, calculating solstices and equinoxes, refining lunar calendars that coordinated festivals and agricultural seasons. And in China, astronomical records date back more than 3,000 years, with observatories built to study the heavens. The quiet tools of time that once measured sun and shadow, water and star, did not fade with the centuries. They evolved, expanded, multiplied in form and function, yet their essence remained. Flowing like a current through the ages, connecting the ancient breath of our ancestors to the ticking pulse of the world we live in now. And though we may no longer mark time with sundials etched in stone or waters slipping through clay, the legacy of those instruments lingers in every schedule, every calendar, every unseen rhythm that shapes our waking lives. And when we look closer, we begin to see that our days, our hours, our very sense of when and how we exist have been molded by the memory of those early keepers of time, those sky watchers, shadow followers, and ritual makers who first looked at the movement of light and wondered not only when the next season would come, but what it meant to live inside the passage of moments. As societies grew more complex, and agriculture gave way to empires, timekeeping moved from fields and temples into the fabric of cities, into the architecture of power and trade. And the ability to measure time became a form of knowledge, and with knowledge came structure, order, coordination, and the shaping of human behavior not by instinct alone, but by shared awareness, festivals timed with moon phases, taxes collected on solar anniversaries, ships launched when stars aligned, and slowly, civilization itself began to spin on the invisible axis of measured time. And this invisible axis would become one of the most enduring legacies of the ancient world, one that touched every life, whether they knew it or not. And with each passing generation, time became more than something observed, became something expected. The Babylonians, who once pressed stargazing records into clay, gave us the base 60 system, dividing hours into 60 minutes and minutes into 60 seconds. A choice rooted in the practical ease of dividing 60 into many equal parts, but one that would echo for thousands of years into every digital watch and atomic clock. And it's humbling to realize that a decision made in the cradle of civilization still ticks in the devices we wear on our wrists. And the calendar, too, bears ancient fingerprints. The Romans, with their lunar calendar, later adjusting to solar cycles under Julius Caesar, whose Julian calendar brought consistency to the year, dividing time into months, many still bearing the names of Roman rulers or deities. And even today, we live by a calendar refined by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582, the Gregorian calendar, which corrected small inaccuracies over time, but which still carries the bones of older systems, the residue of earlier minds who thought deeply about how best to divide the dance of the earth around the sun. And timekeeping shaped not only how we structured the year, but how we moved through space. In the age of exploration, accurate time was not just a convenience, it was survival. To navigate the vast ocean, sailors needed to know their longitude, and this required precise knowledge of the time at sea compared to a reference point back home. Often, Greenwich saw the invention of the marine chronometer, a portable and shock-resistant clock, allowed explorers to map the world with greater confidence, to find new lands and return again. And this ability to carry accurate time across great distances forever changed how humans saw the Earth. compressing the vast and unknown into something more measured, more knowable, more within reach, and it was time. Not compass alone that made this possible, but the legacy of ancient timekeeping also shaped how we think, how we imagine the self in relation to the world. In many early cultures, time was cyclical, a circle, a return, a wheel turning through seasons, rebirth, and ritual. In others, especially as history and empire emerged, time became linear, a line stretching from past to future, progress marching forward. These perceptions weren't simply academic, they defined how people understood history, destiny, memory, and meaning. Even today, different cultures hold to different models of times, some still honoring cycles, others built entirely on progression, and both views trace their roots back to early observations of the sky, of plant life, of sun and moon, and the need to understand how change works in the world. Timekeeping shaped religion, philosophy, architecture. Mosques, cathedrals, temples across the world were often built to align with solstices, equinoxes, and planetary movements. Rituals were timed to lunar cycles, fasts, and festivals to solar calendars. In many traditions, divine order was reflected in celestial order, and to measure time was to witness that divine plan unfold. The ancient Egyptians associated time with the god Thoth, the Greeks with Chronos, the Hindus with Kala, and each reflected a different layer of what time meant, just a sequence, but a power, a principle, a presence. And as timekeeping became more refined, so too did our technologies. From the clepsydras and sundials, we moved to mechanical clocks with gears and pendulums. First appearing in medieval Europe, often housed in church towers, where they rang bells to signal prayer times or curfews. And these clocks were not yet personal. They were communal public instruments of rhythm that helped synchronize the lives of many, and over time, these machines became smaller, portable, more precise. The invention of the pendulum clock by Christian Huygens in the 17th century marked a leap in accuracy, as did innovations in spring mechanisms, and soon, watches became common among the elite, symbols of status and order. With industrialization came the need for even more precise coordination. Factories, railroads, and telegraphs demanded shared time zones, standardized schedules, and the minute hand became not just a marker, but a master. In 1884, the world agreed on the prime meridian at Greenwich, and time zones were carved into the globe like invisible seams, stitching together continents under a unified rhythm. The legacy of the sundial now lived in railway stations and factory whistles. And yet, even as time became more measurable, it did not become more understood. Einstein would later reveal that time was relative, that it stretched and bent with speed and gravity, that clocks on satellites tick differently than those on Earth, and once again, we found ourselves humbled by the complexity of time, reminded that while we may measure it with increasing precision, its essence remains elusive, a concept both external and internal, both cosmic and deeply human. Even our language bears the mark of ancient timekeeping phrases, like saving daylight, losing time, marking time, on the clock, off the clock, all hinting at how deeply the idea of time has woven itself into our sense of self. And perhaps this is the most enduring legacy of all, not just the tools or calendars or measurements, but the idea that time matters, that we are shaped by it, that to be human is, in part, to be aware of passing moments, of changes we cannot stop, of cycles we must adapt to. And yet, as we sleep, as we breathe, as we sit quietly with the rhythm of this story, we might remember something softer, that time does not have to be only pressure, only deadlines, only speed, can be stillness. It can be pattern, it can be the shadow across your window, the sound of rain against a roof, the gentle dimming of the sky at dusk. And in that remembering, we return to the beginning, to the watchers of sun and moon and stars, to the quiet drip of water in a bowl, to the stone laid in the grass where a shadow once rested. And in that place, we find again the gift that time was always meant to be, not a cage, but a compass, not a master, but a melody we can hum along with in peace. As we drift quietly from the memory of sundials and shadow-marked stones, past the dripping echoes of water clocks and the steady ring of mechanical gears, we now find ourselves standing at the threshold of something altogether stranger, something subtler and more precise, something almost too delicate to feel, a world where time is not measured by sunlight or sound, but by the quiet vibrations of atoms, by the invisible dance of particles too small to see, too fast to grasp, yet somehow more accurate than anything we've ever known before. And this is where the future of timekeeping truly begins. Not with the passing of days, but with the splitting of seconds so small they almost escape imagination, but with the splitting scase of morse of the skate, and yet they shape to make out that yet say short, cause in this world of kanap kamas and kamat kamabikis kamas and missing demat the kamam ke ka constant made of some kan me kapke kapam kam some say kam I edika ye kape afan me awa ka lava kisa sa crow and I got it psychic bia back oh ata kikap apa oh you dakana got the put now that this is map always if it they we so boss you then we go down you out so I guess oh so boy got that simple and but this and I get it but this is the phone with this this is because and as could this more the go this At the heart of this new era lies the atomic clock, a marvel of human engineering that doesn't tell time the way a sundial once did. By watching light stretch across stone, but by counting the natural resonance of atoms as they shift between energy states. Most commonly cesium or rubidium atoms which pulse with such precision that they lose less than a second every hundreds of millions of years. And this might sound abstract, theoretical, like a detail buried deep in a laboratory somewhere far away from your life. But in truth, the tick of the atomic clock touches everything. Every GPS signal that guides a plane, every transaction processed in a financial center, every heartbeat of the global internet, all synchronized to these silent atomic rhythms that never falter, never sleep, never slip out of step. And in this we see a new kind of time, not local, not cultural, not seasonal, but universal, mathematical, invisible, and utterly essential to the fabric of the world we now live in. When you look down at your phone and see the time, it may feel like a private experience, a pocket-sized reality. But what you're really seeing is the echo of a distant network of synchronized clocks orbiting Earth and satellites embedded in servers, ticking together in patterns so exact that the difference between one pulse and the next can mean the accuracy of a navigation system or the failure of an entire technology. And nowhere is this more important than in GPS, the global positioning system, where time and space are no longer separate concepts, but deeply entangled. Because to know where you are, you must know when you are. And the satellites that guide us rely on time differences between multiple atomic clocks to triangulate your position. Not just your latitude or longitude, but your elevation, your direction, even your movement. All calculated from the timing of signals moving at the speed of light, and for this to work, those satellites must account for something even more remarkable: Einstein's theory of relativity. Because time, as it turns out, is not constant everywhere. It bends, it warps, it stretches. According to relativity, a clock aboard a satellite in orbit, moving quickly and experiencing slightly less gravity, actually ticks faster than one on Earth. And while the difference is minuscule, just billionths of a second, that tiny shift would render GPS completely useless without correction. So each day, the system compensates for the way gravity and speed affect the passage of time. And in doing so, we acknowledge something ancient and profound: that time is not just a measure, but a mystery. Not just a number, but a force that responds to where you are, how fast you're going, and how deeply you sit in the curve of space itself. And if time bends on Earth, what does it do in the cosmos? As we send probes farther from our planet, as we explore Mars and dream of walking on the icy moons of Jupiter, we begin to face a new challenge, that Earth time may not be enough. A day on Mars, called a sol, is about 24 hours and 39 minutes. Close, but not quite the same. And if humans live there one day, will we still use Earth's seconds and minutes? Or will time be redefined, tailored to new skies, new rhythms, new lives? This is the frontier of timekeeping, not just keeping track of Earth's spin or orbit, but imagining new standards for other worlds, creating clocks for environments where gravity, light, and even the concept of day and night are different. And in doing so, we return again to the core truth. That time, for all its precision, is also contextual, that it emerges not just from machines, but from our relationship to place, to experience, to life itself. Some scientists and futurists now imagine clocks so precise they could detect dark matter, or measure the tiniest shifts in gravitational waves. Clocks that could become instruments of physics, not just of routine clocks, that wouldn't just tell time, but listen to the fabric of the universe, detecting subtle tremors in spacetime like a seismograph feels the Earth. These are optical lattice clocks, newer even than the cesium clocks we've long relied upon, capable of measuring time with even greater exactness. And perhaps, one day, these tools will help us uncover something deeper. Not just how time passes, but why it flows at all. Whether it has a beginning or an end, or whether time, like light, is both particle and wave, both measure and mystery. And yet, even with all this technology, even with satellites above and particles within, the human relationship to time remains deeply emotional. We feel time not in nanoseconds, but in memories. In the way a child grows, a flower fades, a season shifts. We carry time in our bones, in our breath, in the spaces between our thoughts. And even in a world of perfect clocks, we still return to rituals. To marking birthdays, counting sunsets, noticing the rhythm of footsteps and heartbeats and silences. The future of timekeeping may be atomic and universal, but its meaning will always be human. And so, in this part of the story, where the ancient merges with the infinite, we see that the future of time is not only more precise, but more aware. Aware of relativity. Aware of perception. Aware that time is not just something we track, but something we live through, something that lives through us. And as we develop quantum clocks, as we create systems to synchronize machines across oceans and galaxies, we are also developing a deeper understanding that even the most perfect clock cannot measure the feeling of time, the way it slows in grief, or flies in joy, or stretches in the stillness before sleep. Perhaps the future will bring clocks so perfect they never lose a beat across the lifetime of the universe. Perhaps they will be embedded in our bodies, merged with our thoughts, able to count time even in dreams. Perhaps we will use time not just to navigate Earth, but to map wormholes, measure black holes to travel, not through space, but through the folds of chronology itself. But no matter how far we go, we will always carry the echo of the past, the sundial's shadow. The clepsydras drip the spark of starlight in a temple window, reminders that time was never just about measurement, but about meaning. And as we float now in this vast vision of what's to come, we might remember that the truest purpose of timekeeping was never to hurry us. Never to control us, but to give shape to our lives, to help us mark beginnings and ends, to find rhythm in the unknown and peace in the passage. And maybe, just maybe, the future of time isn't about reaching perfect accuracy, but about finding a way to be fully present in each moment, not racing it, not fearing it, but resting in it completely, quietly, together. In the quiet of reflection, when we pause long enough to feel the space between seconds, we begin to sense that time is not only something we measure, but something we inhabit, something we breathe, something we remember, something that wraps itself around every step we take without ever revealing its edges. And in this soft moment, between what has passed and what is still to come, we can begin to see that time is not a straight path or a digital countdown, not a ticking urgency or a grid of appointments, but rather a circle, a rhythm, a quiet return to something that has always been here, patiently waiting beneath all our inventions and calculations and precision. And in this circle, the ancient and the modern do not oppose each other, but move together, hand in hand, like two rivers joining at a gentle bend. And perhaps this is the deepest truth time has to offer. Not that it can be mastered, but that it can be remembered and lived in harmony with. Not through control, but through trust. Because even now, in a world lit by satellites and atomic clocks, even now, as our phones vibrate with alarms and the internet ticks in microseconds, we are still biological beings. With pulses and breath and circadian rhythms, with bodies that respond not to numbers on a screen, but to the tilt of the earth, the warmth of the sun, the darkness of evening. And so while the world may move faster, more fragmented, more filled with urgency and deadlines, we remain bound to older rhythms, slower rhythms. And there is something sacred in returning to them. Something healing in recognizing that time was never meant to hurry us, but to hold us, to guide us gently through the transitions of life, from waking to sleeping, from planting to harvesting, from beginning to ending and beginning again. And so, when we think of the legacy of timekeeping, not just the tools, but the awareness, the reverence, the attention, we might see that its deepest gift was never the division of minutes or the synchronization of clocks, but the invitation to notice, to pay attention to the quiet details that mark the movement of life. The lengthening of shadows in the late afternoon, the coolness of the morning air before the sun climbs high, the way the stars rotate overhead as you stand in silence long enough to see them shift. And these details, once counted in the minds of our ancestors, once etched into stone and song and memory, are still here, waiting to be noticed again. You might remember, too, that time was once a shared ritual, not a private chase, that whole communities gathered to mark the solstice, the harvest, the rising of certain stars, not because they had to, but because they felt the rhythm of nature asking them to. And in those gatherings, something greater was kept. Not just time, but meaning, connection, belonging, and today. Even in the glow of our artificial lights, we still gather at midnight to mark the new year. We still light candles as the days grow short. We still feel the tug of spring and the stillness of winter. And in those rituals is the echo of every sundial, every water clock, every temple aligned to the sun. Time, it seems, was always about more than measurement. It was about remembering who we are, when we are, where we are in the great unfolding of things. And when we let ourselves rest into that awareness, we feel less like we are running out of time and more like we are moving with it slowly, gently, like a leaf, floating down a quiet stream, carried not in a rush, but in a rhythm that knows exactly where it's going. So, in this moment, as your breath slows and your body softens, you can release the ticking thoughts, the numbered tasks, the sharp corners of the day, and let yourself feel the deeper time, the ancient time, the time that moves not in minutes, but in cycles, not in deadlines, but in dawn and dusk, in breath and silence, in memory and return. The future of timekeeping may bring even more precision, more synchronization, more integration between machines and moments. But its wisdom will always depend on something older. The awareness that time is not just a tool, it is a companion, a presence, a quiet current beneath the surface of our days, and the more we listen to it, not with anxiety, but with softness, the more we remember that we are not late, we are not behind. We are simply here, alive in this unfolding now. Part of a rhythm that stretches from the first shadow on a cave wall to the hum of an atomic clock in deep space. From the echo of a drip of water in a clay bowl to the vibration of photons measured in a vacuum. From the beating of a human heart to the orbit of a planet circling a star. And so we rest, not because time has stopped, but because we have found our place within it. We breathe, not because we are counting the seconds, but because we are moving in harmony with something that needs no numbers to be true. This is the legacy of timekeeping. Not the clocks, but the calm they were meant to bring. Not the race, but the rhythm. Not the rush, but the remembering. The remembering that you are part of time, and time is part of you. Always moving, always returning, always right. Here. There is a moment subtle and easy to miss, when the conversation around time moves from questions of measurement and begins to ask something deeper. Not just when something happens, but why not just? How long life lasts, but what it means to move through time at all. And in this soft turn from counting to contemplating, we find the philosophical and spiritual dimension of time. The ancient recognition that time was never just a utility, never just a shadow on a stone or a number on a dial, but something sacred, something alive. Something that held stories, seasons, spirits, and the very pulse of the universe, itself and in every corner of the world, in temples and forests, in deserts and mountains. People began to speak of time, not just as a force to be tracked, but as a being to be honored, a cycle to be worshipped, a story to be remembered. And in doing so, they placed themselves not outside of time, but inside its breath, its mind, its rhythm. In ancient Egypt, time was a god. Not a cold concept, but a divine intelligence, embodied in Thoth, the keeper of the calendar, the recorder of passing ages. And in Mat, the principle of cosmic order, who balanced not only justice, but the harmony of cycles. And the Egyptians saw the year not as a line, but as a wheel, turning through inundation. Growth and harvest, each phase governed by the Nile's flow, each tied to stars like Sirius, whose heliacal rising signaled the coming floods and the renewal of life, and in this world time was deeply tied to rebirth, to the passage through death and the return through memory. And the Book of the Dead was not a book of endings, but a manual for journeying through timelessness into the next cycle, the next dawn, the next breath of the eternal sky. In India, the Vedas spoke of time as Kala, a force vast and unstoppable, both destroyer and creator, a river so large that lifetimes were drops within it. And within Hindu cosmology, time stretches and contracts in a rhythm called the Yuga cycle, for great ages moving from light to darkness and back again, each lasting thousands, even millions of years. And in this model, time was not something to be controlled or escaped, but something to be understood and aligned with. To live in harmony with Dharma, with truth. Even as the world moved toward dissolution and rebirth, and the great god Shiva, in his cosmic dance as Nataraja, was said to beat the drum of creation with one hand while burning the illusion of permanence with the fire in another. And this dance was time itself, not linear, but flowing, circular, and eternal, reminding all beings that every moment was both new and ancient, fleeting and infinite, sacred and dissolving all at once. In the traditions of the Maya, time was carved into stone and woven into myth, counted with astonishing precision through the long count calendar, and seen as a force that moved not in lines, but in spirals, in cycles of creation and destruction, of light and shadow, and the gods themselves were bound to the rhythm of time, appearing at key intervals, embodying the turning of great wheels that spun in harmony with celestial events. And to the Maya, every day had its own energy, its own personality, its own fate, and rituals were performed not just to honor time, but to participate in its unfolding, to keep the balance between heaven and earth, between past and future, between gods and people. And in this culture, time was deeply alive, a presence that demanded respect, precision, and celebration. In Greek philosophy, time split itself into two forms. Chronos, the measurable, the ticking time of clocks and calendars, and Kairos, the opportune moment, the sacred instant when everything aligns, when something greater moves through the ordinary and opens a door. And this distinction would ripple through Western thought for centuries. influencing the idea that not all time is equal, that some moments matter more than others, not because of their length, but because of their depth. And in the Greek myths, Kronos was both father and devourer, a reminder that time creates life but also consumes it. And philosophers like Plato and Aristotle saw time as the moving image of eternity, a reflection of the unchanging, perfect realm within the ever-changing world. And so time became not just a river, but a mirror, something that pointed toward truths beyond itself. In indigenous traditions, time was often inseparable from land, from story, from ancestor. And in many Native American, Aboriginal, and African cosmologies, time was not divided into past, present, and future, but lived in layers, in circles, where the ancestors were not gone, but present, speaking through dreams, through animals, through the landscape itself. And the act of storytelling became a form of timekeeping, a way to carry the past into the now, to bind the living to the wisdom of those who came before. And so ceremonies, dances, and rites of passage weren't just traditions, they were clocks. Rhythms older than writing, tools that kept people in step with the sun. The moon, the spirit of the land, and time was not something to escape, but something to be inside of, a sacred thread that connected every being to each other, to the earth, and to the sky. In Buddhist thought, time is often considered an illusion, a mental construct that arises from the mind's need to label and grasp. And the present moment is seen as the only reality, the only doorway to liberation. And while calendars and cycles exist in Buddhist cultures, the deeper teaching is that attachment to time causes suffering, and by releasing that attachment, by sitting still, by breathing into now, one can glimpse timelessness. The awareness that everything is impermanent and yet unbroken. And in meditation, the goal is not to master time, but to dissolve it, to slip beyond its boundaries and touch the vast stillness beneath all motion. Even in the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, time is filled with spiritual meaning marked by sacred days, holy months, lunar fasts, and weekly rhythms of work and rest, and in each, there is a tension between the eternal and the temporal, between the timeless truth of God and the fleeting breath of human life. And scriptures speak of a time before time, of a day when time will end, of a resurrection, a return, a paradise where time is no longer needed. And in every prayer, there is an attempt to align earthly time with divine purpose, to bring heaven into the hour, the minute, the heartbeat of the believer. Across all these views, something shared emerges. That time, while often feared for its passing, is also revered for its wisdom, for its structure, for its beauty. And in every calendar and ritual, in every myth and metaphor, humans have used time not just to count, but to understand, to align, to belong, to express the inexpressible through the motion of days and years. And maybe this is what time really is. Not a clock, not a number, not a constraint, but a mirror held up to the soul of the world, showing us that everything changes, but that in that change, there is something eternal, something present, something worthy of reverence. And so tonight, as you rest within the cradle of this ancient story, you are not drifting through meaningless minutes. You are floating inside a great story, a sacred rhythm, a truth that has guided generations through mystery and meaning. And even if you do not name the stars or track the seasons, your body still remembers, your breath still belongs, and your presence, right now in this moment, is part of time's unfolding, not separate from it, but woven into it, softly, eternally, beautifully. There was a time when time was silent, when its passage was marked only by light and shadow, by the soft fall of water or the slow curve of stars across a dark sky. But then, quietly at first, a new rhythm began to emerge, a sound made not by wind or wave or the turning of the earth, but by the steady click of gears, the swing of a pendulum, the toll of a bell echoing from stone towers across towns and cities. And with this sound, humanity entered the mechanical age of timekeeping, a new chapter not born of nature but of human ingenuity, precision, and the desire to bring time into sharper focus, to divide it, to control it, to synchronize life itself with a ticking mechanism that would come to define entire civilizations. And in this awakening, in this symphony of wheels and weights and calibrated hands, the world would begin to change. Subtly at first, then all at once, as time shifted from the heavens into the hearts of cities, into the chambers of commerce and the routines of labor, into the very center of how we understood the day. It began as many great revolutions do in the silence of monasteries where monks rose in the middle of the night to chant prayers and knead it. A way to mark the canonical hours, not with stars or sundials which failed in darkness, but with something dependable, something repeatable, something built with the hands. And so the first mechanical clocks were born, large and crude by today's standards, but miraculous in their purpose, driven by falling weights, governed by escapements that regulated their movement, and striking bells to call communities into rhythm. And these early clocks did not have faces or hands. They were not designed for personal use, but as communal instruments, as audible guardians of time, calling not for attention, but for presence, reminding all who heard them that the hour had changed, that the world was moving forward in measured steps. As the centuries passed, the design of these clocks became more refined. In 14th century Europe, tower clocks began to appear in town squares and church steeples. Their large mechanisms housed in wooden or stone rooms high above the ground. Their gears meticulously crafted from iron and wood. Their bells tuned to mark the passage of each hour with clarity and authority. And for many people, this was their first encounter with public time. No longer did they need to look at shadows or ask the priest. Now, the bell told them when to rise, when to work, when to gather, and slowly society itself began to fall into step with these machines, and with this synchronization came a profound shift. Time became external, shared, and constant, no longer something you observed in nature, but something declared from the rooftops. And in this declaration was both power and order. In the workshops of Italy, France, and Germany, clockmakers emerged as artisans of the highest skill, blending science and craftsmanship, geometry and metallurgy, creating mechanisms that grew increasingly complex. With the invention of the verge escapement, the foliot balance, and later the pendulum, which transformed clocks from approximate instruments into precise regulators, and with each improvement, time grew sharper, thinner, more exact. And the idea of minutes, once meaningless, began to matter. And then seconds, and then fractions of seconds, and with each division, life itself began to adapt, until the rhythm of the clock was no longer just a tool. It was a heartbeat imposed upon cities, institutions, and eventually individuals. By the 17th century, the invention of the pendulum clock by Christian Huygens marked a new peak in precision, reducing eras from hours to mere seconds per day. And suddenly, time could be relied upon not just for prayer or market hours, but for navigation, for science, for correspondence and travel. And the world began to shrink, bound together by shared time. Ships could now track their longitude more accurately, enabling global exploration and trade. Scientific experiments could be synchronized, and correspondence between cities could be measured not in vague descriptions of morning or evening, but in the language of numbered hours, written and read with confidence. And still, the clock grew smaller. From towers to walls, from walls to tables, from tables to pockets. Pocket watches became symbols of precision and status in the 18th and 19th centuries, worn by merchants, scholars, and aristocrats, ticking silently in waistcoats, hidden yet always present, whispering reminders of the hour. And with this portability came personalization. Time was no longer only public, it was private, it was yours to check, to carry, to consult. And as industrialization swept through Europe and beyond, the clock moved again, this time into factories, where its rhythm governed the pace of machines, and with machines came schedules. And with schedules came an entirely new relationship to time, one not of flow, but of productivity, efficiency, measurement, and cost. It was here that time took on a sharper edge. In the factories of the Industrial Revolution, the clock dictated shifts, regulated breaks, calculated wages, and divided the human day into units of labor. And this was no longer the gentle time of the sundial or the sacred rhythm of the temple bell. This was mechanical time. Relentless and exact time that ticked on whether you noticed or not. Time that was now built into contracts, timetables, and the architecture of the modern world. And though it brought many advantages, coordination, growth, advancement, it also brought new anxieties, new pressures, a sense that time was always slipping away, that to be late was a kind of sin, and to rest was a kind of waste. In railway stations, telegraph offices, and stock exchanges, time became not just a measure, but a currency. And the invention of standard time zones in the late 19th century, driven by the needs of the railroad industry, carved the world into 24 longitudinal slices, each one tethered to Greenwich Mean Time. And though the Earth still spun as it always had, now it did so in numbered hours, neatly arranged and globally enforced. And from this emerged the modern clock culture we know today, digital, synced, ever-present, where time lives in pockets, on screens, in satellites and server farms, ticking not only for cities, but for machines, for systems, for economies that depend on every second being accounted for, validated, verified. And yet, behind this vast machinery of time, the echo of the past remains. Every gear in a mechanical watch still speaks the language of the monks who first counted prayers in darkness. Every bell tower in a city carries the memory of public life shaped around sound. Every tick of a second hand contains within it the revolution that made time visible, audible, mechanical, and in making it so, changed forever how we understand motion, change, and even ourselves. So as you rest now listening to this quiet unfolding, let yourself feel the shape of time, not just in numbers, but in movement. In the swing of a pendulum, in the weight that slowly descends, in the soft click of a gear finding its place. These sounds, these rhythms, are not separate from you. They are the inheritance of generations who built instruments not just to mark hours, but to connect life to something measurable, shareable, and real. And as you breathe into this moment, you become part of that rhythm, part of the long, slow unfolding of a world that learned how to hear the passage of time, not in silence, but in song. If you close your eyes right now and take a slow breath and let yourself drift for just a moment into memory, you might find that time begins to change shape, that a single second can feel like a minute, that an hour can vanish in what seems like a blink, and suddenly we begin to see that time is not just what the clock tells us, not just what our calendars count, but something deeply personal, fluid, and strange. Something that bends and sways and expands and contracts depending on how we feel, what we remember, what we fear, and what we love. And in this realization, we begin to understand that there are really two clocks running at all times. The one out in the world, ticking steadily with gears or atomic pulses, and the one inside of us, pulsing with emotion, attention, and perception. And the more we study this inner clock, the more we find that it follows not numbers, but narrative, not precision, but presence. And this is the psychology of time. The silent current that carries us through our days, not in seconds, but in sensation, because the mind does not experience time evenly. It stretches time in boredom, compresses it in joy, freezes it in shock, and slows it in danger. Think of how long a minute feels when you're waiting in silence for news you don't want to hear, and how quickly an hour disappears when you're laughing with someone you love. And the difference has nothing to do with the clock. It has everything to do with how deeply you are in the moment, how much of your attention is open or closed, how many pieces of memory are being created. and how emotionally charged the moment is. And this is why childhood feels like it lasted forever. Because every experience was new, rich, full of details that your brain had to absorb and record. And so time stretched wide and full and slow. But as we grow older and more things become familiar, routine, automatic, we stop laying down as many new memories. And the brain compresses the timeline, and the years seem to pass more quickly. Not because they're shorter, but because we feel less of them. This is also why trauma can fracture time. In moments of fear or pain, the brain switches into a different mode. Heightened awareness, adrenaline, survival, and suddenly, what takes only seconds can feel like minutes, even hours, because the mind is recording everything, frame by frame, in an effort to survive. And this phenomenon, known as time dilation, reveals just how subjective our inner clock can be. And in contrast, when we are deeply relaxed, or meditating, or drifting to sleep, time can seem to dissolve entirely, leaving us floating in a kind of timelessness where there is no before or after. Only now, only breath, only presence, and this is the state many mystics, monks, and dreamers have sought for thousands of years, a place beyond time. Inside the stillness of pure awareness, where the tick of the clock fades and the self begins to soften into the moment. And so the question becomes not just how to measure time, but how to feel it, how to inhabit it, how to stretch it or slow it or deepen it. And researchers have found that people who live in awe, who frequently encounter beauty, mystery, and wonder, tend to experience time as more expansive, not because their days are longer, but because they are more attuned to the moment, more open to detail, more likely to pause and take in the colors of the sky, the sound of wind through leaves, the expressions on a stranger's face. And in this attentiveness, time becomes more textured, more full, and thus more memorable. And the more memorable our lives become, the longer they feel, even if the minutes are the same. This is why routine makes time collapse. When every day feels the same, our brain stops paying attention, stops recording deeply, and when we look back, we find that weeks or months have vanished without shape or story. But when we change our environment, travel to new places, meet new people, try new things, our internal clock expands because the mind is forced to wake up, to pay attention, to remember. And in that remembering, time becomes rich again. Not just something that passes, but something that happens. Even our sense of the past and the future are shaped by this inner clock. Some people feel deeply connected to what came before. They dwell in memory, revisit old stories, and see themselves as a continuation of a long thread, while others live mostly in the future, setting goals, making plans, always leaning forward, always chasing the next thing. And still others live moment to moment, sometimes forgetful, sometimes free. And none of these are right or wrong, but they all reflect a different relationship with time. And when we understand that, we can begin to shift that relationship, to move between time zones of the mind, to become more conscious of where we are dwelling and where we'd rather be. There is also a difference between clock time and experience time in cultures. In many Western societies, time is seen as linear, structured, something to be saved, wasted, managed, while in many indigenous, African, or Eastern cultures, time is seen more as a field, something you enter, something that happens when all conditions align and people arrive not when the clock tells them to, but when the moment feels right, when they are ready to be fully present. And this difference can create confusion, even tension, but also reveals how deeply cultural our sense of time really is, shaped not just by biology, but by belief. Even sleep, the place we go to escape the measured world, is not free from time's touch. Dreams often seem timeless or oddly structured, jumping through years in minutes, bending physics, memory, and chronology into a surreal blur. And yet, even in dreams, we feel the passage of something. And some researchers suggest the dreaming Mind has its own inner clock, not tied to reality, but to emotion, to symbolism, to the processing of experience. And when we wake, we feel that strange dissonance that time moved. But not in any way we can describe, and perhaps this is the most honest version of time. Something lived more than measured. And so, as we lie here now, breathing gently into this story, we might let go of the idea that time is only numbers, or charts, or appointments, and begin to feel it instead as a river of experience, shaped by how open we are, how present, how aware. And in that openness, time becomes something we can shape, not with control, but with care, with curiosity, with reverence. And maybe the question isn't what time is it, but how am I inside time right now? Am I rushing? Am I resisting? Or am I breathing with it? Letting it hold me, letting it carry me, gently and slowly and fully. Because no matter what, the clock says it is always possible to step out of the race, to pause, to feel the moment stretch, to feel it deepen, and in that deepening, to return to something older than any watch, older than any calendar, older even than the stars. The part of us that simply knows how to be, how to rest, how to feel the shape of life without needing to measure it. If the clocks of our ancestors were shaped from stone and shadow, from water and gears, then the deeper, more intimate clocks, the ones that measure what it feels like to be alive, have always lived in the spaces between those instruments. In the quiet architecture of temples and cathedrals, in the rising swell of music that builds and fades like breath, in the strokes of paint that try to hold a moment forever, and in the stories passed from mouth to ear again and again, not to mark time, but to transcend it. And perhaps this is the most human instinct of all, not just to count time, but to express it, to turn it into something beautiful. Something that carries the weight of passing days and the depth of remembered moments. And in every culture, in every era, we find that time has not only been measured, it has been painted, carved, sung, woven, danced, and remembered in forms more eternal than the ticking hand of any clock. You might begin with architecture, with the soaring walls of ancient cathedrals, whose very stones were shaped not just for structure, but for light, for alignment, for the rhythm of the sun as it poured through stained glass at certain hours of the day or certain seasons of the year. And inside these sacred spaces, time moved differently, not as pressure, but as presence held in the echo of footsteps on stone, in the flicker of candlelight along vaulted ceilings, in the chant of monks moving through the daily office, marking hours not by bells alone, but by prayer, by ritual, by breath, and the building itself became a calendar. A clock made not of gears, but of silence and shadow and sky. And when the sun struck a specific corner at solstice, or a star aligned, through a narrow window at equinox, it reminded those inside not just of the time of year, but of the fact that time itself could be sacred, that structure could reflect rhythm, and that the divine might be found not in escape from time, but in deeper attention to it. And in the east, the temples of Kyoto, the gardens of Suzhou, the rock alignments of Angkor Wat, each were shaped with time in mind, with awareness of the seasons, the shifting of light, the slow dance of leaves and blossoms that mark not hours, but the eternal return of life itself. And to walk through these places was to be immersed in time's most delicate expression, not counted, not commanded, but felt in the texture of stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, in the way moss grows only where patience has been practiced, in the quiet pattern of ripples across a pond where nothing is rushed, and yet everything changes. Always art itself has always tried to freeze time, to hold a moment beyond its fading. And yet the best art doesn't just stop time, it carries it. A painting captures the feeling of an afternoon long gone. A sculpture holds the memory of movement within stillness. A poem marks a heartbeat, a breath, a realization, and when we read it centuries later, we feel the echo of that same pulse. within ourselves, and so the artist becomes a time traveler, not one who leaves the present, but one who invites the future to meet them in a moment they refuse to let disappear. And in this way, art becomes a kind of timekeeping more intimate than any clock, not precise, not measurable, but utterly real. And then there is music, perhaps the most direct expression of time we have ever known. Because music does not exist without time, it is shaped by it, moved by it, made possible by the flow of beat and silence, of tension and release. And across every culture, music has been used not just to entertain, but to anchor, to mark the hours of the day, to summon memory, to guide the soul through grief and joy, to bring people together in rhythm, in ceremony, in movement, and even now. When we hear a certain melody, we are transported not just to a place, but to a moment, to a season of life, to a version of ourselves that we almost forgot. And that return is not illusion, it is the memory of time made audible. And perhaps no other art form captures the shape of time so perfectly as music, because music flows like time does, not in straight lines, but in waves, in spirals, in patterns that repeat, but never quite the same. Some of the oldest instruments ever discovered, flutes carved from bone, drums made from hollowed trees, speak of this ancient desire to make rhythm, to bring the body and the world into sync. And whether it was the chant of a shaman, the drum of a village dance, or the sacred silence between notes in a raga or a sonata, music has always been a map of time's emotional terrain, showing us not just how time moves, but how it feels, how it builds and breaks, how it longs and releases, how it remembers and lets go. And if music gives time its emotion, then memory gives time its meaning. Because no matter how precisely we measure the hours, it is our memories that give them shape, not as minutes, but as moments, not as quantity, but as depth. And every culture has found ways to honor memory, to carry it forward, to preserve it through story, song, and ritual. And in that act of remembering, we are not just looking back, we are keeping time alive, keeping it present, keeping it connected. In ancient epics, like the Odyssey, the Mahabharata, the Popol Vuh, time is vast and spiraling, filled with gods and ancestors, with events that stretch across generations. And when these stories are told aloud, they become not just tales, but time machines, bringing the past into the breath of the now. And in this oral tradition, we see that memory is not passive, it is active, it is creative, and it is one of the oldest forms of timekeeping, carried not in books, but in bodies, in the rhythm of voice, in the cadence of feet walking the same path that someone once walked 1,000 years before. Even in our own lives, we know that memory is not ordered like a clock. It is fluid, emotional, shaped by meaning, and we remember not what happened on which date, but how it made us feel, what it changed inside us, what it left behind. And this is why photographs matter, not because they show what time it was, but because they show what it meant. And so much of our experience of time is tied to that, to significance, to story, to soul. And maybe this is what makes us human, not that we keep time, but that we make meaning from it, that we write it into symphonies, that we carve it into stone, that we wrap it in myth and melody, and share it with each other as something more than passing minutes, that we mark the seasons not just with calendars, but with dances and festivals, with colors and flavors and laughter and longing, that we don't just live in time, we live through it, with all the beauty, sorrow, joy, and wonder that comes with knowing that every moment is both fleeting and eternal, both now and always. And as you drift now in this quiet space between words, between breaths, you might feel that time is not so far away, not so rigid, not so sharp, but something soft, something shared, something sung. And as the music of your own memories rises and fades in the distance, you might remember that every heartbeat is part of a rhythm much older than you, and yet uniquely yours, and that in every story you carry, In every song you love, in every place that ever made you feel timeless, you are keeping the art of time alive. Gently, beautifully, endlessly. There is a silence that lives just beyond the ticking of the clock. A place where the counting stops, where the hands no longer turn and the numbers fall away. And it is in this space, this breath held between seconds, that we begin to glimpse the deeper mystery of time. Not as something we move through, but as something we might one day move beyond. And from the beginning of consciousness, humans have not only sought to measure time, but to escape it, to step outside its boundaries, to glimpse what might exist, before it began or after it ends, and in every civilization across every century. This longing has surfaced in meditation and mysticism, in science and death, in dreams and rituals, a hunger not just to master time, but to transcend it. To understand what it would mean to live in a state where there is no past, no future, only the eternal presence of now. And it is in this longing that the human spirit touches something both terrifying and beautiful. The idea that time is not the final truth, but a veil, a dimension, a lens through which we see the world, and one we may one day see through in the stillness of meditation. Across centuries and continents, people have sought to quiet the mind so completely that time dissolves, not metaphorically, but experientially, and in that silence, in the breath held long enough to still the noise of thought, there arises a kind of spaciousness that cannot be measured in minutes, a vast awareness that feels outside of motion, a taste of timelessness. And practitioners from the Buddhist caves of the Himalayas to the Christian monasteries of Mount Athos have written of this sensation of being present without sequence, alive without duration, and this state, often called eternity, is not about endless time, but about the absence of time, a condition where the soul no longer rides the current of change, but floats in stillness, untouched, unmoved, and in that stillness there is peace so profound that language cannot hold it, and those who return from such places often do so, changed, quieter, softer, less bound by urgency, because once you have touched the edge of time, the rest of life seems somehow less rushed, less demanding, more sacred, and science too has not been immune to the pull of this mystery. Physics tells us that time may not be fundamental, that it may be emergent, not a thing in itself, but a byproduct of other forces. And theories like those in quantum mechanics or loop quantum gravity suggest that at the deepest level of the universe, time may not exist at all, that the equations describing reality can be written without reference to time. And this challenges everything we think we know, because time feels so real, so absolute, and yet, just as the earth feels still. Beneath our feet, though, it spins at 1,000 miles per hour. Time may feel real because we are inside it, moving with it, unable to see the whole. And the physicist Carlo Rovelli writes that time is not a universal rhythm, but a localized experience, shaped by entropy, by heat, by memory. And when you remove those, when you step beyond change, time may not be there at all. And if that is true, then eternity is not a place we go to, but a condition we return to, a home we forgot we had. Waiting silently at the core of everything, even in death, time becomes slippery. Every culture has its story of what comes next, and in nearly all of them, time changes. In ancient Egypt, the soul passed through trials to enter an eternal afterlife, weighed and judged, purified and reborn. In the Norse myths, warriors rose to Valhalla, where each day repeated in preparation for the end of time itself. In Christianity, the promise of heaven is not just a place, but a state of timeless peace, where suffering ends and eternity begins. And in Buddhism, the wheel of reincarnation spins through lifetimes until one reaches enlightenment, a state beyond birth and death, beyond time, beyond becoming. And in all of these, we see that to die is not just to leave life, but to step beyond time's reach And it is that idea that brings both fear and comfort. That time, which haunts and holds us, will one day let us go. Somewhere deep in our biology, we may even carry the memory of timelessness. In the womb, before breath, before language, before even light, there is no sense of beginning or end, only heartbeat, warmth, and presence. And perhaps that is why sleep feels so healing. Why dreams dissolve the boundaries of time. Why silence feels so ancient. Because we are not only creatures of time, we are also creatures who remember timelessness, who long for it, who return to it in prayer, in trance, in love, in surrender, and sometimes in moments so quiet they pass unnoticed. The moment you watch a sunrise and lose track of how long you've been staring. It's the moment a piece of music holds you completely still. The moment someone's eyes make you forget what day it is. And in these moments, we are not lost, but found, not outside of life, but deeper inside it than ever before. There are even stories, rare and often whispered, of people who, near death, report stepping outside of time altogether, of seeing their life all at once, of touching a realm where past and future were meaningless, where everything just was, and whether these are hallucinations or glimpses of something greater, we cannot say, but we can say that they matter, that they point to something unspoken, but deeply known, a truth that the poets and mystics and seekers have always tried to name. That time is not everything. That beneath its surface lies something still, something whole, something eternal. And so, as we lie here together in this shared breath, this quiet unfolding, we can let go of the need to track time, to measure it, to rush through it, and instead, rest in the deeper truth that you are not your schedule, your clock, your deadlines. You are presence, awareness, life itself. And though time moves through you, it does not define you, because you were here before the ticking began. And you will be here after the hands stop turning, not as a number, but as a being. Part of a rhythm older than time, quieter than silence, and deeper than memory. Perhaps that is what all timekeeping has been trying to tell us, not how much time we have, but how precious it is to feel it, to live in it, to occasionally fall beneath it, into that quiet current where nothing moves. And yet everything is. And now, as we come to the quiet end of this long and gentle journey, as the footsteps of history fade into the distance and the hum of the present softens into stillness, we begin to feel something that has been growing all along. Not an answer, not a final thought, but a kind of return, a settling into something simple, something sacred, something that has always been waiting underneath all the counting and carving and calibrating. And that something is not a tool or a concept, not a calendar or a clock, but a rhythm, a pulse, a breath, the one that began before we were born, and will continue long after we've gone, the one that belongs to no one and yet moves through everything. And as we sit with this, quietly, fully, we begin to understand that time, for all its mystery, has never really been about control or mastery or precision. It has always been about connection, about how we move in harmony with the world, how we show up in the lives of others, how we honor the seasons of our own becoming. We have walked through temples aligned to the stars, watched water drip through ancient bowls, felt the chime of tower bells and the vibration of atomic clocks. We've explored the cycles of planets, the loops of memory, the seconds stretched in fear, and the minutes that vanish in wonder. And at every turn, we have seen that time is not just what moves, it is what holds, what gathers our moments together into something we call life, something we name with stories and mark with meaning. And whether we live by lunar calendars or digital countdowns, whether we rise with the sun or set alarms in the dark, we are always participating in this shared ceremony, not just of passing through time, but of being shaped by it, softened by it, made more aware because of it. And in this awareness, something softens in us. The pressure to rush, to prove, to keep up, it loosens its grip. Because we remember that time was never meant to be a race, that slowness is not laziness, that rest is not waste. We remember that before clocks, there were bodies. Bodies that knew when to rise and when to sleep, when to plant and when to harvest, when to run and when to be still. And that wisdom is still here, in us, if we're willing to listen. And as we listen, we begin to feel it again. The rhythm beneath the rush, the pattern beneath the noise, the deep, steady drum of time as it truly is. Not a straight line, not a countdown, but a circle, a spiral, a heartbeat. Perhaps this is the great paradox of time, that even as we try to measure it, define it, capture it, what it asks of us is something else entirely: to live it, to feel it, to trust it, to know that we are not outside of time, but inside its breath, that we are not separate from the rhythm, we are the rhythm, that our lives in all their imperfection and beauty are time made visible, time made tender, time made human. And maybe the clocks, for all their precision, were never meant to trap us. Maybe they were meant to remind us, to pause, to notice, to mark what matters. Because in the end, we do not remember years, we remember moments. A shared look. First step, a final goodbye, a quiet morning, a loud laugh, a soft song. And it is these moments, unmeasured, unpredictable, alive, that shape the texture of our time on Earth. So what would it mean to live not by the clock, but by the heart? Not in a rush, but in a rhythm. Not as a race, but as a dance. It would mean waking with the light and sleeping with the stars. It would mean letting go of timelines that aren't ours. It would mean trusting that some seasons require stillness and others ask us to bloom. It would mean remembering that slow is smooth and smooth is strong. That waiting is not failure. That silence is not empty. That presence is the most timeless state we can enter. So, as this final chapter settles into your breath, let the weight of time slip from your shoulders. Let the days you cannot control and the moments you cannot redo float gently away. Let the memories come and go like the tide. Let the future be wide and soft and unwritten. And let now this breath, this softness, this moment be enough. Not forever, not perfect, just enough, because you are part of something vast and ancient. Because the clocks may stop, but the rhythm continues. Because you are not late. You are not early. You are right on time. Always have been, always will be.